Hello, this is Anselm with GameLeap, and today we're going to be talking about the 13.18 pre-patch change list. There are a few significant buffs this patch and some very insignificant nerfs, especially in regards to Spirit of Shojin, that are actually really quite questionable. Make sure that you watch until the end so we can go over these Shojin changes together, and make sure to comment your personal opinion on them, because I think they're pretty funny. But first, if you want to climb rank after rank after rank, make sure that you click on the description box below to go to the GameLeap.com website, where there are hundreds of hours of educational content from professional coaches such as myself. Now onto the video. We're going to be going from champion buffs to champion nerfs and then item changes afterwards. Our first buff on this list is Irelia. Irelia's R cooldown is reduced from 140, 100 to 125 to 85. This is actually pretty nice for Irelia. Irelia's ulti is what allows her to all-in most other champions and is actually quite a long cooldown for what it is. Irelia is supposed to be a duelist, and she's not really able to find decent duels. This, in my opinion, is actually a nice change to kind of modernize her with the current set of items that we have. Irelia has lost a huge amount of ability haste due to the sheer amount of changes that certain mythic items have received. Gore Drinker isn't really super great on her. Blade of the Ruin King had its build path changed as well as the actives. Irelia is kind of struggling to get ability haste where she needs it, and this alleviates this issue. This means that for my Irelia players out there will be a lot more kill opportunities for you, so you're able to actually snowball and impact a game. Next up on our list is Gwen. Gwen's buffs were primarily targeted to the jungle, and it definitely does show. Gwen's health growth has been increased from 109 to 115. This means that she'll be a little bit more tanky in the mid game, where she's most susceptible to getting bursted, and her passive monster damage cap has also been increased from 6 plus 10% of her AP to 15 plus 20% of her AP. Now this seems like kind of a small change. 9 damage really isn't that much, right? Until we talk about jungle. 9 damage is going to be the difference from being able to actually contest a Scuttle Crab or clear your jungle without the enemy jungler invading you, and not being able to do those things. This is a pretty reined-in buff that really won't push Gwen too far over the edge either way. This will make Gwen jungle a viable pick for those of you that like to play Gwen, and will give you a counter pick option for a lot of the meta junglers. Gwen does really well into the vast majority of ranged junglers, and also pretty decently into a lot of the assassins that are currently in the meta. Gwen is kind of a counter assassin and a counter early game ranged champion because we have access to Ghost in the jungle role. Kennen is next on our list. Kennen is actually receiving an energy cost reduction on his E, going from 100 to 80 to just 80 flat. 80 flat energy doesn't seem very significant, but this is actually really nice for your combo. Kennen's Q cooldown is very low, and a lot of people like to max it first. So this will allow you to get more Qs off in a trade without actually having to go out of energy and be struggling tapping your Q key furiously to get another Q off. Kennen is also receiving a R cooldown buff. This is super nice. Kennen's ulti on live is 120 seconds flat, but it's being changed to 120 seconds, scaling down all the way to 80 seconds. That means at rank 2 it's 100 seconds, and at rank 3 it's 80. This will allow you to go for more of those important flanks, and is actually kind of a sort of damage buff for Kennen. This is overall a very nice buff to Kennen, and is kind of along that vein that we talked about in the pre-patch video, where Kennen's R is most likely going to receive some sort of change. Senna is the next buff champion on this list. Riot specifically said that they wanted to buff crit Senna. There's a couple of ways that they could have gone about this, but they chose the most respectable path, and that is simply just increasing Senna's crit damage from 160 to 175%, which is normal. Senna is balanced around not having such heavy hitting crits, but crit items as a whole have been nerfed so significantly, this will probably make her feel pretty fun to play, but not super oppressive. Crit items cost a lot of gold. A buff like this is really nice when it comes to synergy with Senna's passive, and it will prevent her from building the annoying tank items that make her so frustrating to deal with. This is a cool buff that will allow Senna to actually play as a pseudo carry instead of as a heal bot that uses Locket and is very tanky with range slows. Next up on our list is Bard. Bard is receiving a significant rework to his passive and to his Caretaker Shrine. First and foremost, Bard's passive, on his chimes, Traveler's Call, the out-of-combat movement speed is being buffed a significant amount. The maximum amount of stacks you're able to hold is being doubled from 5 to 10, and the stack duration has also been increased from 7 to 20. This means that when you're running away from people out of combat, you'll have significantly longer on your movement speed to juke them. When you're roaming and trying to ignore your AD carry bot lane, as all Bard players do, you can go to top lane faster and then back to bot lane to ignore your AD carry some more. And Caretaker Shrine is also receiving some pretty significant buffs. It now works on an ammo system and has 2 ammo at a time. The cooldown and ammo recharge time has increased from 14 to 18 seconds because he's able to double cast them. The charge time has also been halved from 10 to 5 seconds, allowing your AD carry to make use, or you to make use of these shrines a little bit more early instead of having to wait for them to cook the entire time. So in order to make up for this huge buff, the move speed on Caretaker Shrine has actually been nerfed to a pretty decent degree. At rank 1, it's now 20%, and then at max rank, it's 30%, which is the current value on live. A small AP ratio has also been added onto this, and this is purely because Bard gets to double dip into a lot of AP items where other enchanters or other tank supports don't get access to. So at max rank, this is a buff, but it is definitely an early game nerf to Bard. This will overall leave Bard in a very nice spot where the AD carry will be punished less for Bard roaming. He's going to be able to make rotations on the map a lot easier and then get back to bot lane to help out that AD carry that he's letting starve. And last but not least, we have Thresh on our buff list. Thresh is receiving a W shield per soul increase from 1.5 to 2. This is kind of like what we talked about in the pre-patch video. Thresh will get significantly tankier in the early game due to this. You're collecting most of your souls during the early game. It's kind of hard to collect souls anywhere else because you're not going to be around for when they're actually dying. So this means that when you throw your lantern out to somebody and they take it back and it gives you bolt the shield, it's going to be increased in value. This is really nice for Thresh overall because Thresh does suffer from getting completely and utterly bursted after his entire cooldown salvo has been used. This seems pretty minor, but it will actually end up affecting Thresh to a pretty large degree, I would imagine. Now, there is one champion that is missing from the pre-patch buff list, and that is Jhin. Riot has not released the full Jhin buffs yet, and the reason for this is probably one of two. Either they don't know exactly what path they want to take for him and they're kind of on the fence about what they want to do, or they're going to pull the buffs from the patch. When these changes are uploaded, we'll make sure to include them in the comments down below so you guys won't have to go and dig through a whole bunch of Twitters to actually find the numbers. Now that we talked about buffs, let's go ahead and talk about nerfs. Jarvan 4 is the first candidate for a nerf, and this is well deserved. However, the nerf that they're choosing to go with is a little bit weird. Jarvan's passive damage is reduced from 8% of current HP to 6%. This is a nerf to his jungle clear speed, first and foremost, and then a nerf to his gank potential afterwards. J4's damage is very high when it comes to early game. This champion absolutely one-shots people if you get caught by an EQ combo, and if he's able to walk up to you in melee and then EQ you afterwards, you're basically not going to be able to get away from this. This nerf will prevent J4 from being able to go for those really fast early ganks by nerfing the current HP damage on his martial cadence, and then of course making sure that he won't do as much damage to you on a gank. This is not going to be enough to bring him in line, especially when combined with these Shojin changes that we are receiving. J4 is going to need to get tapped down again. Next on our list is Kayn. Ross passive healing is reduced from 20 to 30% to 25% flat. This is a buff to Ross when you first get him, and then a nerf in the later stages of the game. This is exactly what we talked about in the pre-patch video, where if they are going to nerf Ross, it's probably going to be the passive healing. Here it is. Ross R80 ratio is also reduced from 13% per 100 bonus AD to 10%. This will allow tanks to actually play the game into him. The changes to items have made Ross do a whole lot of damage. Red Kayn is very problematic, even though it might not appear that he is. Blue Kayn is more frustrating to play against, but Red Kayn, when he gets rolling, is significantly stronger due to his fighting pattern. So this will prevent Kayn from deleting your bruisers and make it a little bit more fair to play against. Rel is next on our nerf list. Her E movement speed has been reduced from 15 to 25% to 12 to 20%. This is pretty significant for early game Rel. A percentage movement speed nerf like this affects when you don't have boots more than it affects when you do have boots. So if you're playing Rel with Hex Slash and you use your targeted W to flip somebody over your head, it's going to be a lot harder to do that because they'll have more time to react and actually kite you out. This, I think, is a pretty fair nerf. I would imagine that Rel receives more nerfs in the future if the item changes from the preseason are not that significant. Rel is very tanky during the lane phase, and her damage is also quite high, but this is a good start to nerfing this champion. We don't want to kill Rel. It's nice to see her actually seeing play, but this nerf might be a little bit on the lighter side. Speaking of light nerfs, we have Tryndamere up next. The health growth on Tryndamere has been reduced from 115 to 108, and his base AD has been reduced from 68 to 66. So this is a pretty substantial early game nerf to Tryndamere, and also a nerf to his mid game scaling where he's really strong. This might not be enough to deal with the extra range that he has received. The Tryndamere nerf is going to be pretty significant for his early game, but Tryn's early game is significantly stronger due to the range increase than it was before. Even if we lose a little bit of base AD, which makes our spin and our crits deal more damage, it might not outweigh the 1 or 2 extra autos that you get out in a trade. So I'm very interested to see if this is actually going to be an effective nerf for this champion. I would imagine that there will be a little bit more tuning done to him, but this is definitely a good start and should prevent Tryndamere from randomly 2-tapping you in the early game like he does now. Xayah's nerfs are definitely the most significant nerfs of the entire patch. Her base health has been reduced by a massive 30 points from 660 to 630. This will affect your lane phase to a gigantic level. This means that in the mid game when an assassin gets on you, if you don't react perfectly with your R, you're going to get blown up. This is overall a pretty fair nerf. This is really cool because it's combined with this next change. Her health growth has also been increased from 102 to 106. So as the game goes on, this nerf is kind of undone. This is primarily aimed at making Xayah more vulnerable in the early game, where she's harder to punish due to her insane W damage and her ease damage, without trying to nuke the champion from viability. And the last nerf that Xayah is going to receive is an E cooldown increase from 11 to 9 to 13 to 9. This is once again targeted towards her early game and not so much towards her late game. Xayah's E is the skill that you max. This is what does all of your damage. They're basically just trying to open up windows where you can actually trade with Xayah without her simply one-shotting you in almost every trade and having so much HP to fall back on top of her ultimate. Now, the Zarya changes are actually missing from this patch as well. Riot is primarily nerfing Zarya for pro play and for higher elo games. Now that we talked about all the champion changes, let's go ahead and talk about system changes. First and foremost, Static Shiv has been nerfed as far as the wave clear goes. The minion damage has been reduced from 250 to 350 to 200 flat. This is a very significant nerf to champions that can kind of cheat their way through the lane phase due to Shiv's wave clear. Sivir, Vayne, Kai'Sa are all going to be very affected by this nerf. However, in order to counteract this nerf, the AD has been increased on this item from 45 to 50. This is actually kind of a nice change. This means that Static Shiv is more aligned with Stormrazor, and the item actually has a proper niche as a higher attack speed alternative to Stormrazor instead of just an automatic increase to your wave clear. Stormrazor has also received a very minor buff. The total AD on this item has been increased from 50 to 55, which brings it more in line with other starting items. Kraken Slayer is of course going to be the strongest non-mythic item for AD carries in the game if your champion is able to use it. Otherwise, if your champion isn't able to use it, then Stormrazor is a decent alternative. The 5 AD might not seem like much for Stormrazor, but since this item does get value out of critically striking and scaling with crit chance, this is a more significant buff than you would imagine. AD carries auto attack more than any other cast champion, so Stormrazor might actually see a little bit of the spotlight due to these changes. Spear of Shojin has been nerfed. The AD has been reduced from 60 to 55. This does nothing to the item, to be quite frank. Spear of Shojin is one of the most efficient stat sticks in the entire game. This nerf is actually pretty laughable, but it is a nerf to the champions that rush it, like Hecarim and Jarvan 4. This item is definitely going to get nerfed again. There is no doubt in my mind that this is going to be fair. This is probably one of the most sad nerfs I've ever seen in all of my time of playing League. A 580 nerf isn't that significant. Black Cleaver is quite strong as a Spear of Shojin replacement, but what makes Shojin so incredibly oppressive is the sheer amount of HP that it grants, as well as the damage and the ability haste. The item is just ridiculous when it comes down to it, and a 580 nerf will not change that Renekton from having a 5-second cooldown dash in the mid-game. Now let's go ahead and talk about the Crown of the Shattered Queen changes. These changes are actually really cool in my opinion because they open up a bunch of build diversity to a whole new cast of champions, while also making the item a little bit easier to use for those of us that like to get hit by an errant skill shot or two. First and foremost, the AP has been increased from 70 to 85. This is 90 to 105 for the Ornn version. Now, before you get up in arms, because there's another passive that gives AP, the Poise passive has actually been completely removed, since it's so abusable in pro play, but not so abusable in solo queue. This is what makes the item more accessible as a whole and gives room for another viable mythic to a whole bunch of champions. This means that we don't only get value from Crown while the passive is up, and we're actually able to get a meaningful amount of AP from this item, as well as the Safeguard passive. This is a very nice change that makes the item so much more dynamic and interesting, instead of just being play incredibly safe and try not to get the passive popped. Now we can get the passive popped and trade it for meaningful cooldowns without being completely neutered. Fantastic change in my opinion. If you enjoyed the video, make sure that you click on the description box below to go to GameLeap.com to sign up for our professional courses. Anyways, this was Unsung with GameLeap. Thank you all for watching and hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.